Warning, this video contains subject matter that may be disturbing to some viewers. Thank you for joining True Crime and Mysterious Cases. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Brandon Lawson. Now, Brandon has been a missing person since 2013. Now, when Brandon went missing, he was living in San Angelo, Texas, with his common-law wife of 10 years, Lawson, and their 3 children. Brandon would move his family to San Angelo following his brother Kyle Lawson, where they would work in the oil field industry. In his past, Brandon had had a problem with drugs, specifically meth, and had done some time in prison. Now, he had a long period of sobriety prior to his disappearance, but it is suspected that he may have relapsed right before Brandon disappeared. On the night of August 8th, 2013, Brandon and Ledessa would get into an argument because Brandon had not come home at all the night before, and Ledessa suspected he was using drugs again. Brandon was upset about the fight that he had had with Ledessa, and shortly before midnight, he called his father, who lived in Crawley, Texas, and told him he was going to come stay up there with him for a couple of days. Brandon then got into his white Ford F-150 and left his home. At about 12:30 a.m., Brandon called his brother Kyle and told him that he had run out of gas and was in between San Angelo and Bront, Texas. And that would be U.S. Route 277. Bront, Texas is a really small rural community about 30 miles outside of San Angelo. After retrieving a gas can from Brandon and Ledessa's house, Kyle and his girlfriend then headed out to Brandon's location. During this time, there were a lot of phone calls back and forth and a lot of different time frames, but I'm going to try to simplify that just for time's sake. So there were multiple phone calls between Brandon and Kyle. Kyle would later say that the conversations were short. Brandon would only say a couple of sentences, and then the call would get dropped. He did say that Brandon mentioned during one of those calls that somebody was chasing him. Brandon also made multiple calls to Ledessa's phone, but the calls went unanswered because Ledessa was charging her phone in her vehicle. The family would learn several days later, after Ledessa checked their phone records, that at 12:50 a.m., Brandon had made a phone call to 911.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. It's like we're just pushing guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. I got to take the bitch to the woods. Quick turn. And when I talk is home. I show you, and he's home. That's the first guy. You need an ambulance? Yeah. No, I need the cops.
A little after 1 a.m., a sheriff's deputy arrived at Brandon's truck, followed by Kyle at about 1:10 a.m., but Brandon was nowhere to be found. There were a few phone calls made between Brandon and Kyle, but because of the cell phone service out in that area, the calls kept dropping. Kyle did say that during one of the calls, Brandon claimed that he was bleeding and also that he was about 10 minutes up the road. Now, it needs to be mentioned that at this time, Brandon had an active felony warrant for his arrest. So Kyle didn't mention to the deputy that he had spoken with Brandon on the phone. And the deputy never mentioned to Kyle that Brandon had called 911. Kyle and his girlfriend, they just thought that Brandon was hiding from the deputy. So they spoke with the deputy and then drove up the road where they parked and waited for Brandon. Brandon never showed up. They waited about 45 minutes, and then Kyle and his girlfriend headed back home to San Angelo. Now, about 5 a.m., Kyle went back to Brandon's truck and was surprised because Brandon still hadn't returned to his truck. The sheriff's department came out and towed Brandon's truck at about 8 a.m., and there was still no signs of Brandon. Brandon's cell phone started going straight to voicemail at about 1:19 a.m. that morning, and he's never been heard from again. This particular area of Texas where Brandon went missing from is in a very rural area. This was in the middle of the night. It's very dark out there. There's little to no traffic at night. It would be hard to see where you were going and what you were doing if you were, for some reason, running through these fields. Law enforcement did several searches for Brandon. They never found him, but I have to wonder how hard they really looked. The sheriff's wife ran the local newspaper at the time, and she did several articles stating that Brandon was for sure not in their area and that he had basically been running from his warrant. Brandon's been missing now for 8 years. There's been no indication that he's just running from his warrant. LaDessa says that Brandon had hired an attorney and was taking care of the warrant, and therefore there was no reason for him to be gone this long. Another thing worth mentioning is that LaDessa hired a helicopter to fly over as much land as possible looking for Brandon within, I think, about 24 hours of his disappearance. Now, the family tried to do multiple searches, but they had a lot of pushback from the local landowners. A lot of the local landowners wouldn't allow them to search on their properties for some reason. Possibly because of the news articles that the sheriff's wife had written stating Brandon had run off. Now, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding this case, particularly surrounding the 911 call that we heard a little earlier. You can't understand everything that Brandon is saying in the 911 call. So there's a lot of videos and things out there that just focus on that 911 call. So if you're interested in doing a little more research on that, you can pretty much find videos everywhere. The 911 call is not real clear. Plus, the cell phone service out there is not really good. You can understand enough to hear that Brandon is in some kind of distress. He's saying that somebody else is there with him, somebody is chasing him, and he's asking for them to send law enforcement to him. Whatever happened to Brandon that night is still a mystery. There's a lot of discussion on the internet about the case. There's a Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page. There are discussions on the case on Reddit and web sleuths. Some people believe that Brandon was in a drug-induced psychosis and got lost on one of the properties and succumbed to the elements. Other people swear that they can hear someone else's voice on the 911 call, and even some people say that they hear gunshots on the 911 call. Whatever the case may be, Brandon is still missing, and his family still doesn't have answers. If you have any information about Brandon Lawson, please contact the Bront, Texas Sheriff's Office. That's going to conclude our video for the day. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Please hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons so that you don't miss an episode of True Crime and Mysterious Cases.